All right, let's do another tournament style problem solving. Da-dum, da-dum, dum, dum, da-dum. Okay, well, for those of you who may not have seen it before, we do this like we play games in tournaments. We're going to look at different things, try and figure out what we're doing. I'm going to try and help you with the way I do it. And we're not going to make a piece movement until we've figured out stuff quite in detail. There's a few exceptions. But the general rule is we're going to, if it takes us 5 moves to win, we're going to figure out what those 5 moves are before we make a piece movement. Because we're trying to simulate tournament situations. The best way to tell if you can play in a tournament well, face the simulation. If you can beat the simulation multiple times, that should tell you something. You can't fake it. Well, I think I could do it. Well, there's no think. You either can or you can't. That's the old Yoda line. Do or do not. There is no try. So, there is no try. We do or do not. And actually, we do it a lot. So, tell you the 4 elements that I do. We look at checks, we look at captures of pieces, we look at piece contacts, and we look at the situation on the board. There's no specific order. I do it freelance, whatever catches my eye, that's what I do. But I know the 4 elements. So sometimes it goes in any order. I could do situation first. I could do, usually checks and captures are at the top of the list, either 1 and 2, or in some cases I'll do the situation because it's obvious in front of you. You see things that jump out. And when I look at a chess problem, everybody's different, but something should jump out at you. Sometimes the thing that jumps out at you is that nothing jumps out at you. So it's one of those deals. It's hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. So, this one, not the first thing I see. I look at other things and whatever, but this one, the situational part is pretty, obvious that you have to make a mental declaration of it, because in tournaments, if you don't do it, you can make the mistake that it has happened even to grandmasters. He's threatening to take our rook with check in the corner. And people, sometimes get so wrapped up in their own business that clearly black is on the white king side, like white on rice, okay? But if you don't pay attention in the far corner, queen takes rook check and then you lose. Just about every mistake you can imagine has happened in chess to somebody. Okay. And what makes the good player is that he has either had it happen to him or he's seen it happen to somebody else. In some cases, he spotted it in advance and sidestepped it. But those are the 3 ways that you find out about mistakes in chess. It happens to you, you see it happen to somebody else, or you spotted it in a variation mentally and sidestepped it. Okay, fine. So just, helpful stuff. So basically, the first things I'm looking at, let's look at the checks and captures. Queen takes h2 check, takes g3 check, queen takes knight check. Okay, rook can take knight check. Rook can take g3 or e3. Knight can capture h2 or e3. And that's all the checks and captures we can do. Okay. Piece contacts, stuff that could be of interest would be, for example, we could play queen to g2 check. That doesn't do anything. obviously, except lose, but you never know. So these are the things you have to, if you go through and run through the list of these things, and it sounds ridiculous, okay? And it is ridiculous. But the fact that it's ridiculous is what helps you. Because I was doing one earlier today, and I'm dead serious. If you see the problem, the last move I looked at was the winning move. Well, was the start of the sequence of the winning move. And that's just the way it happened. It wasn't something I spotted and then held on to the end for dramatic purposes. That was not what I'm doing. I don't do this for dramatic purposes. I'm doing it the way I do it because I don't show up in the videos. Now, every problem that you see is random. It shows up in front of me. I don't know what these problems are. You can go to the website and try it yourself. It just gives you random stuff. So it's the ultimate test. There is no preparation for this test. It's not that, well, you see this problem over here, we got this attack. It doesn't work that way. It's random stuff. So what you see is you're seeing it essentially as I see it. Now I'm making the video, and so you might see it at a different time than I'm physically seeing it today. But you're seeing me see it live. That's the point. So I don't have prior knowledge. There's, which is why I make mistakes in those problem videos. I don't do 100%. I don't know. If I knew what the problems were, it'd be 100%. I can guarantee you that. So every time you see me solve a problem, it's a legit solution, and you're watching it happen as I do it. There's no faking. I'm a tournament player. I've won tournaments, and I've won quite a few tournaments. I've won some good prizes. That doesn't happen if it's fake. It only happens if it's all real and you know exactly what you're doing. So there's only one guy that wins a tournament, or in some cases you might tie for first. And it's a big deal. It's hard to do. If you've never won a tournament, then you understand. Until you win a tournament, it's hard to do. And it's hard to do after you've done it. But only one guy. You have a tournament, could be 15 guys there, could be 100 guys. Only one guy is going to be number one overall. Now, there's going to be some other prizes that you can win based on your ratings, whatever, to make it more interesting. There'll be first overall, then there'll usually be like first guy under 2,000 is one. In some cases, you'd have first under 1,800, first under 1,600. If it's a bigger tournament, there'll be first in every category, okay? Below 2,200, below 2,000. There might be a first for unrated players, which is, primarily aimed for the beginner kids or beginner adults that show up. Different stuff, first under age 10 on big tournaments. This just all depends. Well, it doesn't matter. So basically you show up to play a chess tournament, and if you win the chess tournament, first overall, that's what it says. First overall for the XYZ Open, whatever it is. And whoever was there is there, and you beat whoever was there. And if people didn't show up, that's their problem. You don't get a trophy that says, well, I won tournaments in the 80s. Okay? There's no tournament trophy that says first place, but Kasparov wasn't there, so you're really not, that doesn't count, okay? That doesn't say, there's no trophy that says that. The trophy says first place. You were the one, all the people who showed up, and you win first place, you get the first place trophy. That, if you go to a tournament tomorrow and win first place, that would be awesome. It does not going to say on the trophy, first place to Jimmy, Magnus Carlsen wasn't there. Well, that's too bad. That's his problem. All I see is a tournament, and it doesn't say, Jimmy has, hey, I went to this tournament, won a trophy. I won the first place. That's awesome, man. You're first place. So, it's all good. So, we're looking at this crazy stuff, trying to figure out. One of the things, like this one is not obvious, which is good because if it's obvious, it doesn't really mean much. But nothing is jumping out at me, okay? I don't see a lot, I look at stuff like rook takes knight. He's going to play rook takes rook, and you've given an exchange away, and his rook in the corner of A1, which was doing nothing, is now doing something for free. Well, that's not good. We're not here to help this guy win. That's nothing special. So anyway, I looked at that. I don't like it. I looked at rook takes G3 again. Knight takes, and we're not getting anything out of it. It might be useful in the future, but the other thing that really comes to mind is this isn't really a piece contact. I guess in the first, I guess there must be at least two different kinds of piece contacts, which is like we move a piece, like for example, rook to F7 to attack his queen is a piece contact move. It's a stupid one because you lose a rook. But the move I'm thinking of that now I'm looking at that looks interesting to me is I guess it's a secondary piece contact where it's rook on A8 to F8. We're going to double rooks on the F file and see if that does anything for us. This is the most obvious positive thing that I could find because that rook's doing nothing. Our other pieces, they just don't coordinate well enough to be able to sacrifice on G3. I can't play rook to F2. But with the rook on F8, when I double the rooks, so rook A to F8, now rook to F2 is a legitimate threat. Rook takes knight is also a legitimate mating threat. So, to me, rook A to F8 is the move I'm looking at because now I've created rook takes knight check is a mate threat. I also have rook to F2 because if he plays rook takes F2, I play rook takes F2, and that knight is assisting holding the F2 square. He's getting checkmated. So the more I look at rook A to F8, that to me looks like the move that wins. Now there's going to be something else we got to do, and we have to figure out what it is. So he can defend. Let's look at the most obvious, the most dangerous threat of doubling rooks for black is that he needs to defend that knight or move it. You know, the choices there would be rook on E2 to E1. That stops the rook takes knight because we'd play rook takes knight, he'd play rook takes rook, we'd play rook takes rook, he'd play rook takes rook, and he's still mated. Yeah, the problem is that rook cannot leave E2 because then what happens is when he goes, as soon as he goes rook on E2 to E1, rook takes knight, removes the defender of H2, queen takes H2 as checkmate. Okay, so rook to E1 from E2 doesn't work. You can't do that move. So looks to me like after rook A to F8, he has to move the knight. If he doesn't move it, we're going to take the knight and checkmate him. Either on F1 or on H2. So rook on A to F8 is clearly the move that's winning. We've already set up a nasty checkmate combo. So he can't defend it with his rook. Rook to F2 would fail. We would just take that rook off. Okay. The only thing he'd get out of rook to F2 is he'd open up the diagonal for the queen to defend on F1. But, you know, whoopity-doo. You're giving a rook for that. You've just lost differently. So that's not cutting it. So in my mind, now technically he would be able to play rook to G2, blocking the queen's attack on F1. That to me looks suspiciously weak. Let's see. Let's see, rook to G2. This is a fun part of, and I say fun in quotations, it's not fun. This is the fun part of the tournament part. You got to look at all these moves and go, rook to G2. Okay. Got to calculate a new line. Rook to G2. Well, let's just say take the rook with the queen just for curiosity, brute force it. Queen takes rook, king takes queen. You got, the rooks are doubled. You can play rook to F2, check. He could go king to G1 or king to H1. This doesn't look very promising, actually. Yeah, it's not good. I don't like it at all. So, I like the doubling of rooks. But I don't like rook to g2. That's a really strong move that is bogus. So, because it's blocking me. But maybe rook to f2 works. Rook to f2 if he plays, because he'd have to take the rook because we're going to checkmate him if he doesn't. So let's say rook takes f2 for white. We now play rook takes f2. Again, there's a mate threat. I'm liking it. He's running out of things. He's going to check us on the back rank with his queen. And then we go king to h7. And he's going to have to play queen takes knight to avoid mate. Looks like this is just absolutely winning for us. So let's go rook a to f8. Rook to g2 loses to rook to f2. He doesn't have anything. He's got no piece that can defend that rook. So rook to f2 for us is a killer. Rook takes, we play rook takes. He can queen check us and then he's dead. So rook to g2 doesn't work. So my philosophy was that he can defend the knight or move it. And defending the knight by either rook going back to defend the knight. The knight is triple attacked when we play rook af8. He's only got right now double defenders. He needs a third defender, a blocker. We tried the blocking failed. He cannot block. He can't third defender it with the rook because we checkmate him by force. So he has to move the knight. This is how you figure this out in tournament situations. He's got to move the knight. I'm like, great, he's moved his knight. What are we doing? I'm saying that rook to f2 move was so awesome, I'm going to do it again. Rook to f2, I'm threatening to checkmate him. It looks just as bad for him. Oh, yeah. Rook to f2 for him is terrible. Because he has to take our rook. We play rook again takes, and now we're threatening two different checkmates. Rook, queen g2 and queen takes h2 checkmate. Man, we have this guy 6 ways to Sunday. I'm already convinced. This is it. We've done everything. We've defended the knight, it loses. We've blocked the attack of the knight, it loses. We move the knight, it loses. He moved it, you lose. We already did the work. This is what I mean by tournament style. We're just playing the moves that we've already calculated. I told you. You gotta do all. Who cares? Rook takes knight. Queen takes knight. Rook takes queen. We don't care. I win. Okay. This is how you win tournament style. Are you good enough to play a tournament? I don't know. You tell me. I already know the answer. Okay. This is the preparation style I'm teaching you so that you know how to do it and you know what's going on. Because if you can do this, which you can do it, you're just going to have to apply yourself mentally. This isn't a gimme. This isn't a little kids thing. This is what separates the men from the boys. If you want to win chess games and then chess tournaments, you have to do what I'm just showing you. And I'm showing you can do it. But it's a mental process, and that's what I'm showing you is the mental process. Now, what did he take there? It doesn't really matter. I'm just curious. Rook takes pawn. Okay, well, whatever, dude. All right. So, check, capture, etc. Let's check. Rook f4 check. He'll just play pawn takes, whatever. So, no other captures are possible. The situation, to me, is the number one most important thing here. We're about to queen this h-pawn. He has a real problem because we're going to queen this h-pawn. Now, he looks to me like the only thing he can do is to play like rook to c1 with the potential of rook to h1. That is his methodology of stopping this pawn from queening. So nothing else that he's, well, I say rook to c1. Rook to c1 or c2. Either one of those moves will get it done. Okay. So there's two things we could do. And that doesn't work. Let me show you the brute force. H7, rook to, let's say, c1, just for the heck of it. Oh heck, that just queens. Okay. What he's going to do? If we go h7, his rook move doesn't work. It's too slow. Actually, it's not too slow. It's correct. Rook c1 is correct. He stops our queen, but not the way you think he's going to stop it. He cannot stop it on h1, but he can stop it on g1. And you're like, well, that pawn's on the h-file. It's on, yeah, guess what, Charlie? Look at this. h7, rook to c1. h8, queen, rook to g1, check. Does that look like a checkmating formation if we were on the edge of the board? It does to me. Now you see my problem. You see what I see. So what I see here is that h7, rook to c1, he's going to stop it by checking us, pushing us back, and then checking again on h1, and then eating the queen in the corner. So I'm a smart guy. h7 looks pretty good. You know, may not be the best move, but let's just go with it. It's the most threatening move. That's what we want to analyze, the move that threatens his position the most, and that is h7. h7, rook to c1. Well, I have a clever move for you there, buddy. How about rook to f3? You want to go to the h-file? I say come and get it. You want to go to the g-file? I say come and get that too, because either one of those moves, like rook h1 is met by rook to h3, blocking him. He goes, that's not cool. How about rook to g1? Check. I'm like, well, I got rook to g3. I'm blocking you yet again. So what happens is this. Whether he goes to h1 first and then goes back to g1, or just goes rook to g1 first, it's all the same. I'm going to show you. Let's go back to the beginning. We want to always make sure we're following the sequence from the beginning so we don't mentally place a piece on a square that it's not going to be in the variation. This is a mistake that happens if you don't do it the way I'm doing it. I do it restarting from the beginning, so I'm just building this into my brain consistently in the short-term memory, and so it stays there and we're good. So h7, rook to c1. Again, c2 I think is the same thing. Rook to f3. Rook to g1 check, rook to g3. Okay. The point is there, rook to g1 check, rook to g3. He's not going to trade rooks because he loses, right? So he goes, okay, rook to h1. I go king g5. All right, I'm going to queen this pawn, or try to queen it anyway. I'm going to protect my king from being checked on the g-file. Play king g5, guarding the pawn and shepherding the pawn all the way to the queening square. So, again, let's go start from the beginning. h7, rook to c1, rook to f3. And if he goes to rook to h1 first, we go rook h3, stops that. And if he goes rook g1 check, we go back to g3 with the rook, or let's look at briefly king h5. I don't think this is the right move, but you know, king h5, rook to g8 is forced. He has to play rook to g. Oh, I'm sorry, he can't play that. Yes, he actually cannot. He cannot go to the h file. He has to go to the g file. Oh, geez. h7 is killing him. I was thinking that he could do that, and so let's do this again. See, every time you make a realization, go back to the beginning. H7, rook C1, rook F3. Yeah, he's got a problem. He can never go to the H file because we put the rook behind the pawn at H3. He goes rook to G1 check. Oh yeah, no, that's right. He can't do that. He can't play rook G1 check. Well, he can, but it doesn't do anything. We go king H5, and the pawn stops his rook from defending on G8. He is dead meat. So, he's got problems. Rook C1, rook F3. And if he doesn't go to H file first, and if he goes to rook G1 check, rook G3, he is screwed, because if he ever goes to the H file, we go rook to H3. He is toast. So is there another way that he can... Oh yeah, there is another way. All right, I remember seeing the other way. So yes, rook F3 is just crushing. So H7... rook to C1 fails to rook to F3, probably double exclamation point. And you see why. Once the rook gets to H3, that pawn queens. He cannot block it. So, H7, king to D5 is like, and it's check, by the way. So king to D5 is check. So he gets time, which this could help him. So I would say king H5 seems to be the right move. So now the question becomes, now he can make another move like rook to C1. We don't have the ability to run our rook in front, in between his rook and the pawn or the king, because he's got a pawn that guards F4. Rook to F3 doesn't do any good unless my king's on G4. When he plays king D5 check, I lose G4. I mean, I guess I could play king to G3. That might be the move. King to G5 is not the right move. The right move has to be king to G3, and you see why. We need to have that king with the ability to support the rook, to put the rook behind the H pawn. That's what the H7, rook to C1, rook to F3, double exclamation tells us, is that that rook needs to get behind that H pawn at H3. Or in the case of, if he plays king to D5, king to G3, and if he plays rook to C1, we go rook to F2. Mimicking the same sequence to put that rook on G2 against a check, or against H2 against rook to H1. So H7 is the move that threatens his position the most, because it threatens to queen the next move. And the only way he can stop that is to play either rook to C2, rook to C1, both of those are basically the same move, or king to D5. So king to D5 check, rook to G3. If he plays rook to C3 check, we would just play rook to F3. He can never trade rooks, okay? He literally can never trade rooks. And king to G3 is the key move, because it also prevents him from playing rook to H4, because the goal on defense, rooks belong behind the enemy passed pawn. On offense, which is us, we're the offense in this one, trying to queen the pawn. The rooks also belong behind the pawn, and you saw that was the rook to F3 idea. So I'm thinking H7 is the move. I'm correct. Rook to H1, just like I predicted. So we figured out every contingency that he could do. Now, it's because it's an endgame. We could do this. Rook to F3 wins. Double exclamation. Whatever. He can never trade. That took 11 minutes and 20 seconds to win the game. That's a fair deal, don't you think? You can spend 11 minutes to win a game at the right position, and this was the key position. This is a 2400 level problem. You either can do this or you can't. Okay, and like I said, this is not an obvious problem when you look at it. Now the solution is super simple. Okay, which is what you see here. The solution looks, when you look at the moves, you're like, oh, that was easy. How did I not get it? It's not finding the moves. What we're doing is finding the things that have to be done. Okay, when the engineers build the bridge, the architect of the bridge knows what needs to be done, and the plans exist with all the things that need to be done in there, so that the engineers building the bridge, they're also masters of their craft. So they take the blueprints of the bridge and then they execute those blueprints. The architect has to know what has to be done and where it has to be done. The engineers who build it also know these things. So this is a thing where we have to understand what needs to be done to facilitate the queening of our pawn. H7 wins. But it's not like, oh, well, that's the easy problem. We just play H7 and we win. That didn't. You have to figure out what is his defensive prospects. What can he do defensively? And this is why you do homework and work on your end games. In the end game, the rook needs to get behind the pawn, which we understand as a really good player. I know this. So I know what he needs to be doing. And so that was how I was able to construct a defense against his defense. The interception of his defense of rook to c1, which I thought really was the best move. But king to d5 was a legitimate threat as well. King to d5, king to g3 is the move that responds to that. See, this is a variation that never shows up in the game, obviously, because it didn't show up in this game either. But this is a legitimate threat that if you misplay this, king to g5 is inferior. King to f3 will absolutely throw the game away. King d5, king to f3, rook h4, you got problems now. He's got 2 pawns. He's going to queen on you. So this is what I'm talking about. You got to know. This problem demonstrates you have to know things that don't show up on the board. And I explained this to you in the process of this problem so that you see why. I have to teach you why to do the things we're doing. This is where the learning occurs. You understand now he's trying to get behind my pawn to stop it. And I'm trying to get to a position where I can prevent that from happening if possible. Which is why rook to f3, double exclamation. This is the winning move. H7 isn't really the winning move. Rook to f3 is the one that cashes it. There's nothing he can do at this point. If he checks, maybe go to g3. If he doesn't check, maybe go to h3. It's just that simple. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what the in-game books tell you. That the Grandmaster's right. Game over. There's nothing you could do. He could check me. I'm just going to go king h5 and it's over. This is ridiculous. I mean, taking the rook, you can't take the rook. You can't trade rooks. He did. It's over. So, awesome problem. 2400 lets you know it is not easy. Okay, here we go again. Now, in my other videos, I've said this, so I say it every time I see it. If you don't know this before now, you know it now. I'm a monster in king and pawn endgames, okay? You kind of saw that in that last problem. So, my philosophy is I'm so good at king and pawn endgames that every time I have a chance to get to a king and pawn endgame, I'm always looking at exchanging the pieces and does it work? To me, right off the bat, this is a winning king and pawn endgame for me. That's what I see, and I'm going to explain to you why this is. So I'm looking at, he plays rook g3. I'm like, dude, that's my buddy. Rook takes g3, you lose. He just loses. He's going to play h takes g3. Now, my king has to move because this pawn on g5 threatens the queen. This is known as the square of the pawn. The pawn sits on the square. That's the first square. You count this 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a 4 by 4. My king is not in this square. So rook takes rook, pawn takes rook. The only place I can get into this square from g5 to d5 to d8 to g8 is king d6. I'm now in the square. My king will stop this pawn, guaranteed. So I have to make this rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, king in here to stop the pawns. They now no longer can queen. Now he's got a problem. This pawn square is 5 by 5. His king is in the square of my pawn queening. Problem is, he's going to play king to h2, and I'm going to go d4. Now the square is 4 by 4. He's already dead. He's lost already. And instead of king to h2, if he plays king to f2, same story. d4. He can't stop both of these pawns. Because this pawn, once I play king d6, this pawn moves to a 4 by 4 square. And this pawn is still on the board. It's only in a 3 by 3, easily catched. Problem is, the white king cannot catch both pawns. He can get one or the other. This is known as the distant pass pawn, the one that's the furthest away from his king. This is why he loses. This pawn is why he loses. Well, this is the pawn that will probably win the game. This is the reason that he loses, because the distraction factor of this pawn, he's got to keep two pawns under control, but he's a very short, slow guy. He's a slow mover. He can't stop both of these guys. You need a queen or a rook to stop both of these because they're very fast, because they can move the full board at one shot. The king is one at a time. He takes steps. You know, the queen and the rook essentially teleport at will. So this is a winning king and pawn endgame for me. I don't have to physically calculate all the moves. All I have to do is recognize the dominant elements, which is this pawn. I've got to keep my king in the square of this pawn, which means from G to D files, I've got to get to D6. And at this point, every time he moves the pawn, I move my king, and I'm going to eat it like Pac-Man. There's nothing he can do. He loses. And like I said, I don't have to physically calculate all the moves. I've got to recognize that as long as I'm in the square of this pawn, I don't need to calculate. It's already over. He's dead. He went there. Stop this if you can. You can't. There you go. Now, if you look at the sequence, let's look at the sequence that ends this game. It looks super easy. And it is easy, but it's only easy if you know what you need to know. And I know all that you need to know in this kind of endgame. I make it, as this is my old chemistry professor. That guy was an awesome professor. I didn't learn a lot of chemistry from him, but he did teach me the one thing that's the most important in his class is that he was really good, and he made it look so easy. He's like, did a sequence, and he's like, you guys have any questions? Whole class must have been 40 guys, men and women. All right. And we're all older because this is an advanced chemistry class. And we're in there dead silent, like he's talking to rocks. And he was a really nice guy too. He's like, okay, look, you sure you don't have any questions? He goes, the thing is, let me tell you, he was a PhD professor. He told us, I have this job here teaching chemistry at the university. This isn't really, I don't have this job for this job. This is not it's not why he's here. He said, I'm here as a research chemist. He said, I teach chemistry at this university, and the reason I'm here isn't just to teach students like you guys, which was me and the rest of the class, chemistry. He goes, my job here is to teach chemistry, and then I get to play in the multi-million-dollar chemistry research laboratory. So that guy, because that was what he did. He was a research chemist. He was really good. And he said, because I do that, he's obviously very good. He's a PhD chemistry teacher. You know, he's a PhD. He's got a PhD in organic chemistry or whatever. That guy was awesome. He's like, the thing I want to tell you is that when someone is so good at something, they can make it look easier than it actually is. He said, it's when I asked you if you have questions, I want you to ask me questions no matter how ridiculous you might think you might look for asking the question. Because when I'm doing it, it's fairly easy. And it was, man, he made everything look so easy. And then you would go home and look at the stuff. It's like, you know, when I looked at this in the board, it was super easy, but now I can't figure out what the heck this guy's doing. That was the lesson that my chemistry teacher, Dr. Garcia, taught us, is that he was so good at chemistry, he made it look way easier than it actually was. I'm thinking some of this is the same thing. This looks way easier than it is. You're going, rook takes rook, whatever, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's over. I could have done this easy. Well, you could. But if you go back and redo the video section here, you'll see that it's easy because I'm explaining the elements of this problem that make it super easy. Because it's not an easy problem. If you're not as good at king and pawn endings as I am, this problem is more difficult. Because first thing you have to figure out is, should I trade the rooks or should I not trade the rooks, okay? Now, for me, I've done all the king and pawn endgame work. And hopefully you guys are going to get the inspiration. You know what? Maybe this guy's onto something. Maybe I need to go work on king and pawn endgames, which you need to do what I'm doing. So hopefully that helps. Because that was fairly basic. Well, when you know what you need to know, it's like when you take your car to a mechanic who's really good, and he's like, oh yeah, bing, bing, bing. He's like, he knows how to do this. So he makes it look easier than it is because he's done all the work to get to that level. And I have done the work to get to that level. I'm trying to teach you guys the things that I know and the sequences that I use to help you get closer to that level. You're not going to get there in a day or a week or a month or 2 months. It's a process, but I'm showing you the techniques to how you can get to a higher level today than you were yesterday. It's a little bit higher, it doesn't matter. If you just gain a tiny bit each day, in a year, you're like, whoa, okay, I'm on to something. Okay, so let's do this one. Now, this guy, what do we have here? 4, 5, 6, he's got 3 pawns ahead of us. So we're not playing an end game with this guy, that's for sure. Okay, I've seen problems like this before. Not specifically, that's a deceptive phrase that I used. I've seen problems, when I say like this, I've seen problems before where it looks like it's ridiculously easy. The thing that I see should jump out at you. Look, we're going to checkmate this guy on g7 if I move my queen to g7, right? Seems fairly obvious. So, the question is, I already see the answer to this question, but you have to know this question. Can I play the queen to f6 or e5? There's a reason I said that. And mate him on g7. Can I do this and avoid the obvious? He's going to play this queen check and king to here, queen to e2, queen to... Can I survive the checks and the harassment his queen and knight will put on my king and run him out of checks and then checkmate him? That's the question. Can we actually place the queen in position to checkmate him on g7 and withstand his barrage of a queen and knight combination? That's the question to me. Because clearly, if you look at this, there's nothing. Man, he owns b1. We're not going to get the rooks to get behind whatever. This is a queen and bishop checkmate, or we're 3 pawns down and we're going to get rolled in the endgame. That's what I'm telling you. That's my tournament players' experience tells me that, as my father would say, you are in situation deep freeze, and can you escape? Okay, that's the thing. We're trying to escape his checks, and if we do that, we win. Okay, so the first thing is I look at the natural move and the one that's the most devastating potentially would be queen to f6. There's no pawn movement to pawn move like f6, queen takes, and then rook a7. Haha, he blocks the checkmate. So our first goal is to look at queen to f6 because there's no help coming. The only help that would stop a checkmate on here is him checkmating us, doing something, perpetual check, or placing a knight on f5 that guards the square. That queen can't stop it. Unless he comes up somewhere where he could check us on a3 and then go back. And he'll lose his queen anyway. It doesn't matter. So, I'm looking at conceptually playing queen f6, mating him on the move that he stops checking me. That's what I'm looking at. So the question is, can I survive and escape? If the answer is yes, we win. If the answer is no, got to come up with something different. So let's say queen f6. So he's got queen to e2 check, a triple fork. His queen is forking both of our rooks and our king. But that's okay. We don't need the rooks to checkmate him. So queen f6, queen to e2 check. We have one move. King f4. Fine, whatever. King f4. Now, his knight can't check us on e2 because his queen's on e2. Haha. So now what does he do? Check king f4. He could play e5 check. That's a possibility. Doesn't do anything to me. I would just, run away. Not g4. King cannot go to g4 because queen takes g2 check, and then my queen is dead the next. Well, queen is gone. I still don't go to g4 if you could take me check, and that's not happening. So queen to f6. We always restart. After I look at something, I come back. I always restart from the beginning so that I get the right phrasing of the motion of the pieces in the right place. I don't think a piece is somewhere where it isn't. I always reset and go from the start. If you don't do that and try to, I can remember my queen was on f6. Yeah, good luck with that. You can remember it up until the game where you don't remember it and you lose and you're like, I forgot. So I always do it this way because that just eliminates, even if it's 1 out of 100 times, it eliminates that one time out of 100. Queen to f6, queen to e2 check, king f4. Man, he does not have a check. e5 check, that's all he has. So e5 check, fine. King g3, come get some. So, well, he does have, I'm not saying it's good, but he does have knight to e4 check. And I would go pawn takes knight's forced because he takes my queen if I don't. So pawn takes knight. His queen is still on e2. Pawn takes knight. He can go what? I mean, where can he go? Oh, he can go queen takes d3 check. And I don't care. I just go rook to f3. I don't care if he plays pawn takes rook. Because the move, when he stops checking me, I checkmate him. That's the only thing that I care about. I'm playing a position. After queen to f6, as soon as black stops checking our king, we mate him on g7. There's nothing he can do. This is the question. Can we survive? Looks like we can survive. Let's try it again. Queen f6. You need to double and triple check this as many times as you need. 7 minutes, 15 seconds. Who cares? Queen f6 check. Queen e2 check. King f4. e5 check. I don't even waste my time taking the pawn because it's just going to create hassles for me. He'll play eventually queen. If I play d takes e, he's going to play queen takes e. My queen is gone. We lose. So if we lose our queen trade for anything, we lose. He's going to crush us on the ending. So he checks us, we run. e5 check. So queen f6 check, queen e2 check, king f4, e5 check, king g3. Knight, his queen is still on e2, so knight to e4 is the only knight check he gets. Knight e4 check, f takes e4. Queen takes d3 check, rook to f3, and he does not have a dark squared check with his queen at all. His rook could play, yeah, rook to e4 doesn't do anything because there's not a check there. He's done. I win. Take my rook, I don't care. Whatever. So, you watch me do it. This is exactly how I do it in tournament play. You know, we looked at the situation, we looked at the board, checked all our stuff, okay, that's going on, right? We lose, you know, this one, the situation was once again a dominant feature. We lose this endgame. There's just nothing you could do. So we're going to have to checkmate him or lose. You know, rook takes, you know, looking at the checks and captures don't really do anything. The obvious thing was the Swiss cheese around his king. He had Swiss cheese with green squares, and so we're like, okay, we're on the green squares, no problem. Easy. But, once again, it's easy because I do checks, captures, piece contacts, and situation. And in this one, the situation was like, it boils away all other concerns that we're going to lose this game if we don't checkmate him. So it became much simpler by properly analyzing and determining what the dominant feature of the position was. Cakewalk for us. We ate this like candy. Okay. Now, same thing again. Queen takes g7 check, queen d5 check. Those don't do anything. The key thing that to me it sticks out, he's got two guys on our f2. So right now our queen's guarding f2, that's fine. But this is another situation thing. You know, queen takes c4, loses. Queen takes g7, loses. Rook can't take or do anything or check. So that's, you know, queen d5 check and two pawns we can take. And they both well, two of those moves for sure lose. Okay. Piece contacts, we could do stuff like rook to a1 and win that a pawn. We're still losing. Those queen and two pawns will destroy us for sure. So that's not going to work. Rook to a1, that's a red herring. It doesn't work. You will not survive the game. So our number one concern is not to get zipped at f2, possibly even for mate. We don't know, but so that's the number one concern in my mind. And so my thinking is that this is similar to the last problem that I see rook to e7. I'm threatening to checkmate you. Can you stop it? He can, I mean, he can always stop it, but can he stop it to advantage? So when I say, can you stop it, I'm implying that he can stop it by playing queen takes f2 and, you know, loses a rook, but that doesn't really stop it. You know, it stops the immediate one, but he loses. So can he stop me from checkmating him on g7 to advantage for himself? The answer is yes, he could. If I play rook to e7, he has queen to b1 check, king to g2, queen to g6. That's pretty stopped. Okay? That's pretty much stopped. Okay, well, that's bogus. You know, he stops that mating threat there forever. Now, What's this toughie? Ah, well, that doesn't work either. Had another idea, but it doesn't work. Well, actually, it might work. Look at this for a second. I'm saying queen to d5 check. Clearly rook f7, rook e8 is mate. So king h8 is the forced move. One of the things we have, queen d5 check, king h8, queen f7 threatens to checkmate him. So that might be it. Queen d5 check, king to h8, queen to f7 threatens checkmate. So he can play the only move that will stop that checkmate threat, because my rook is still at the back rank. He doesn't have that queen to b1, queen to g6 defensive combo. He only has rook g8. And after rook g8, I have rook to e8. Now what, Grasshopper? He cannot defend. Yes, my queen on f7. And I saw the idea that if you go back to the basic position that you're looking at right now, queen d5 check, king h8, queen f5 does not work. The only move that would win potentially, queen d5 check, queen to, and then king h8, queen to f7. He can't take the queen because rook e8 is mating. Rook e8 check, rook f8, rook takes f8, checkmate. So it's queen to f7 is the devastating move. And it has to be on f7. If you went queen to f5, it doesn't work because he's got rook g8 and you don't have the ability to play rook to e8. So once again, queen d5 check, king h8, queen to f7, rook to g8 forced, rook to e8. Now what? He can't, his rook is on g8. He cannot defend it because his queen is on the diagonal to defend it, but it can't defend because my queen's on f7. Even if he played c3, rook takes g8 is checkmate. I don't have to take his queen. Just rook takes g8 is checkmate. So, like I said, we can't play rook to a1 because this is just a losing endgame. Turns out we don't have to worry about it. This guy's toast. Now we just have to survive his one last check. Who cares? Okay, that's 5-0. That was pretty bad. That was pretty awesome. That was a 2660, and I made that look like it was candy. It didn't look like candy in the beginning, did it? It looked tough. The 2000 problem was the easiest quote unquote of the bunch. I made this one look like candy. But this is because I've done a lot of stuff and I've seen problems. I've seen that the move queen f7. I've seen this kind of move before, or queen to f2 when it's black doing it to white. It's the back, he's got a weak back rank. And this is the result. That if you don't see, and this is not a common move, man, I'm telling you. Queen d5 check, you're like, yeah, he goes to the corner, now what? You're dead, right? Well, no. This is a very advanced move that most people never see. And, the rest speaks for itself. So again, we had to determine the situation that if we don't cash a mate, we're losing, we're dead. His end game is just going to destroy us. So, and again, the question, like the last problem, can we survive the checks? Which we can, no big deal. We survived it easily because he didn't have anything. This one was much easier than the previous one because he had a knight. And one of the things, you know, in the end games with lesser pieces, knight with lesser amounts of pieces. Knight and queen are just a nasty combo. Both of them have just almost magical powers. So hopefully you enjoyed these. Were some great problems. You guys know what to do. I'll talk to you later.